Vladimir Putin is facing a growing list of challenges. The war in Ukraine has dragged on far longer than the Kremlin anticipated. Russia's relationship with the West has collapsed, and time is no longer on the Russian president's side. Still, few would have predicted that France would suddenly emerge as such a serious headache for Moscow. Without firing a single shot, Paris has managed to strike at one of Russia's most vulnerable pressure points. In fact, France has delivered two recent blows, and the second one is particularly significant because it directly supports something Ukraine urgently needs. The first move came when French authorities took control of a tanker linked to Russia's so-called shadow fleet, the network of vessels used to quietly transport Russian oil despite international sanctions. On January 22nd, reports confirmed that a tanker named Grinch was intercepted in the Mediterranean. The vessel was already under sanctions and was suspected of operating under a false flag. Following a detailed boarding operation by the French Navy, maritime officials concluded that the ship's registration was irregular. Flying under another country's flag is a common tactic used by shadow fleet vessels to avoid detection and enforcement. Shortly after the seizure, French President Emmanuel Macron made it clear that the operation was no accident. He stated that France would not accept violations of international law and confirmed that the mission was carried out in international waters with the support of allied nations, fully in line with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. A judicial investigation was launched and the tanker was diverted. That reference to allied support was telling. The United Kingdom played an important behind-the-scenes role. British sources revealed that a Royal Navy patrol ship had been tracking the tanker well before French forces moved in. UK officials later confirmed that Britain provided intelligence and monitoring assistance as the vessel passed through the Strait of Gibraltar. The location is strategically crucial. The narrow waterway links the Atlantic Ocean with the Mediterranean Sea and serves as one of the world's busiest maritime corridors. With a long-standing military presence in Gibraltar, the UK was well positioned to monitor the tanker's movements as it entered the Mediterranean. Although the Grinch was sailing under the flag of Comoros, an obscure island nation in East Africa, it remained a prime target. The tanker had been sanctioned by the UK, the European Union, and the United States, all of which accused it of being part of the shadow fleet that continues to funnel oil revenue into Russia. Investigators later determined that the vessel had departed from Russia's Murmansk region, though its final destination remains unclear. This was not Britain's first recent encounter with Russia's shadow fleet. Earlier in January, U.S. authorities pursued two vessels suspected of transporting oil between Russia and Venezuela. One of them led American forces on a lengthy chase before being intercepted between Scotland and Iceland, where it was found operating under the flag of Guyana. In that case as well, the UK provided logistical support, access to military bases, and aerial surveillance. While Britain assisted in both operations, it was France that dominated the headlines on January 22. The loss of another tanker represents a serious setback for Moscow, which increasingly relies on these aging and poorly regulated ships to keep oil revenues flowing at a time when financial pressure is mounting. Russia's shadow fleet was assembled specifically to bypass the sanctions imposed after the invasion of Ukraine. It consists of hundreds of older tankers, many purchased on the secondary market and often operating in conditions that would fail standard inspections. Through these vessels, Russian oil continues to reach buyers such as India, China, Venezuela, and other countries willing to purchase discounted crude despite Western restrictions. The scale of Russia's shadow fleet is enormous. According to The Guardian, it may consist of as many as 1,423 tankers, with 921 of them sanctioned by at least one Western authority. Those figures come from Lloyd's List Intelligence, though even that source admits the numbers are estimates rather than hard facts. Given the secretive nature of the operation, the true size of the fleet could be even larger. By definition, a hidden armada is difficult to count with any real precision. Seen in that light, France taking a single tanker off the board does not, by itself, cripple Russia's oil exports.
One vessel can be replaced and the flow can continue. After all, Putin has reportedly poured around $14 billion into building this fleet by May 2024. The real significance of the seizure lies less in the ship itself and more in the signal it sends. France has made it clear that it is paying attention and it is not acting alone. The United Kingdom and the United States have also stepped up efforts in recent weeks to disrupt shadow fleet operations wherever possible. A system that once operated with little interference is now facing unprecedented oversight, and oversight brings risk. Russia cannot simply stop using the shadow fleet. Oil remains one of the country's most important sources of income, even when it is sold at reduced prices. With a large budget deficit, limited access to international credit markets, and frozen foreign currency reserves, Moscow needs every revenue stream it can maintain. Oil is central to that strategy. But now, every tanker leaving a Russian port does so under a cloud of uncertainty. Sanctioning countries are watching closely, and any shadow fleet vessel could potentially be intercepted, especially if it enters European or US-controlled waters.
The takeaway is straightforward. Today, France seized one tanker. Tomorrow, France, possibly working alongside allies, could launch a broader campaign aimed at dismantling much larger parts of the shadow fleet. If that happens, Russia will have little room to respond. The entire premise of the fleet relies on deniability. Moscow cannot openly claim ownership of these ships without admitting the very sanctions evasion it insists is not happening. Legal realities further weaken Russia's position. As the European Policy Center has noted, European states already possess strong legal authority to carry out such seizures. International frameworks like the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea allow countries to intervene against vessels deemed unsafe, while MARPOL and SOLAS regulations permit detention of ships that fail to meet environmental and safety standards. Even if Russia attempted to challenge a seizure, it would have virtually no legal footing. While the capture of any shadow fleet tanker is significant, especially for Ukraine, which is fighting a war of attrition where financial endurance matters as much as battlefield success, the second development is arguably even more consequential. France has now overtaken the United States as the largest provider of military intelligence. On January 16th, less than a week before the Grinch was seized, Business Insider reported that President Emmanuel Macron publicly disclosed a major shift in intelligence support. During his New Year's address to the French armed forces, Macron stated that France now supplies roughly two-thirds of the intelligence Ukraine relies on in its war against Russia. Just a year earlier, Ukraine had depended overwhelmingly on American intelligence capabilities. That shift is enormous. It helps Ukraine reduce its reliance on the United States at a moment when the scale of ongoing American intelligence support is increasingly uncertain. According to Business Insider, France's expanded role aligns with its broader ambition to position itself as a leading military power in Europe, particularly as Washington pressures European nations to shoulder more responsibility for their own defense. The Kyiv Independent has emphasized why this intelligence support, regardless of its source, is so critical for Ukraine. Every piece of information matters. High-resolution, up-to-date satellite imagery is especially valuable, as it allows Ukrainian forces to track Russian troop movements, identify key military assets, and plan strikes using long-range missiles and drones. In effect, this space-based intelligence complements the constant surveillance provided by reconnaissance drones operating over Ukrainian territory. Together, these developments show that France's role in the conflict is expanding well beyond symbolic gestures, shaping both the economic pressure on Russia and Ukraine's ability to fight smarter and longer. Public information about the exact nature of the intelligence France is supplying to Ukraine remains limited. That said, several strong indicators point in a clear direction, starting with remarks made by France's Minister of the Armed Forces, Sébastien Lecornu. In March 2024, speaking on France Inter, Lecornu stated that France was prepared to provide Ukraine with whatever intelligence it required.
More importantly, he suggested that such sharing was already underway, emphasizing that France's intelligence capabilities are sovereign and domestically developed, and that this intelligence was being passed on to Ukrainian partners. As with President Macron's comments, no operational details were disclosed. Lecornu's reference to an independent, sovereign intelligence system led defense analysts at Militarny to conclude that France is likely supporting Ukraine through its CSO, Composante Spatiale Optique military satellite network. The CSO constellation reached full operational status in 2021. An interesting detail often overlooked is that the final satellite in the system was transported to its launch site aboard a Ukrainian AN-124 cargo aircraft, an early sign that cooperation between the two countries may have been planned well before it was publicly acknowledged. According to Militarny, all three CSO satellites share the same core design. Their optical payloads are built around Korsch-type telescopes using mirrors made from zero-dur, a highly stable glass-ceramic material with near-zero thermal expansion. This allows the satellites to maintain extremely precise imaging even under changing temperature conditions. In addition to optical sensors, each satellite is equipped with infrared imaging capabilities. They also carry multiple telescopes capable of photographing the same target from different angles, allowing analysts to generate detailed three-dimensional terrain models, an ability that is particularly valuable for modern battlefield planning. The sophistication of the CSO system extends beyond individual satellites. The constellation was designed as an integrated structure, with each satellite occupying a specific role. Together, they provide highly detailed and frequently updated intelligence on ground activity. CSO-1 operates at an altitude of roughly 800 kilometers, about 497 miles, making it one of the highest flying components of the system. Its role is broad area surveillance, capturing wide swaths of territory at a resolution of up to 35 centimeters per pixel. This level of clarity is sufficient to identify major military assets, such as armored vehicles, aircraft positions, and large-scale troop movements. CSO-2 functions at a much lower orbit, around 480 kilometers, approximately 298 miles. From this altitude, it delivers imagery with a resolution of about 18 centimeters per pixel. That increased detail allows analysts to move beyond simply spotting equipment and instead identify specific vehicle types and models. Crucially, it also helps distinguish real military hardware from decoys, reducing the risk that Ukraine expends precision munitions on fake targets. The trade-off is durability. Operating at this altitude exposes the satellite to residual atmospheric drag, limiting its operational lifespan to roughly a decade. Launched in 2020, CSO-2 is expected to remain active until around 2030.
CSO-3 closely mirrors CSO-1 in terms of orbital height and image quality, but its purpose is different. Rather than expanding coverage, CSO-3 improves what is known as the revisit rate, how often the same location can be imaged. By operating at the same altitude as CSO-1 but in a different orbital phase, CSO-3 allows the system to refresh imagery of the same area within hours. In practical terms, this means Ukrainian planners can rely on satellite images that are rarely more than 12 hours old, assuming a standard 24-hour orbital cycle. Together, these capabilities suggest that France is providing Ukraine with a level of satellite-based intelligence that is both detailed and timely, exactly the kind of information needed for precision strikes, defensive planning, and real-time battlefield awareness. And the intelligence picture likely goes even further. Ukraine may also be gaining access to imagery produced by France's Pléiades and Pléiades Neo commercial satellite systems, developed and launched by Airbus Defence and Space between 2011 and 2021. Ukraine was not a passive bystander in this effort. It played a role in enabling parts of the constellation's deployment, making it reasonable to assume that Kyiv is among the recipients of the data these satellites collect.
Pleiades EO-3 and NEO-4, for example, were launched aboard Vega rockets equipped with Ukrainian-built RD-843 engines produced by Yuzhmash. Both satellites are capable of capturing imagery at a resolution of 30 centimeters per pixel and can image swaths of land roughly 14 kilometers wide. That level of clarity allows analysts to observe detailed ground activity across large areas. The earlier Pleiades 1A and 1B satellites further expand this capability. While their resolution is slightly lower, about 50 centimeters per pixel, they can cover wider areas, imaging up to 20 kilometers of territory in a single pass. Taken together, these platforms provide a powerful pool of high-quality commercial satellite imagery that can complement military systems. France also operates the CERES constellation, short for Capacité d'écoute électromagnétique spatiale, which consists of 3 satellites placed into orbit with the help of Ukrainian launch components. Orbiting at approximately 700 kilometers above Earth, these satellites perform a very different mission. Rather than taking images, CERES specializes in electronic intelligence. The satellites fly in a triangular formation, allowing them to detect, locate, and triangulate radio frequency emissions from the ground. If Ukraine needs to identify the source of a signal or confirm whether a particular emitter is active, CERES provides exactly that capability. That said, there are clear limits to what France can offer. None of its satellites appear to provide early warning for ballistic missile launches, an intelligence gap shared by most of Europe. France also lacks its own radar imaging satellites, although it does receive radar data from allies such as Italy and Germany. That information could theoretically be passed on to Ukraine, or those countries may be supplying it directly. Either way, such contributions would fall outside the portion of Ukrainian intelligence currently attributed to France.
That was a lot of technical detail, so now let's step back and look at why all of this matters. France's growing intelligence role is critical because it helps Ukraine reduce its dependence on the United States at a time when American support has become unpredictable. Kyiv cannot be certain that a Trump administration will consistently provide the intelligence Ukraine needs. The events of 2025 made that painfully clear, showing just how quickly the U.S.-Ukraine relationship can shift based on political calculations and the state of peace talks with Russia. On March 5, 2025, U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz confirmed that Washington had temporarily halted military intelligence sharing with Ukraine, following a disastrous White House meeting between President Donald Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky. Although access was restored shortly afterward, the Kyiv Independent reported that Trump warned Ukraine it could be cut off again unless it accepted a deeply unfavorable peace proposal that would have required surrendering key territory to Russia. Even now, the scope of U.S. intelligence sharing remains unclear. The United States is clearly providing some level of support, but whether it matches what Ukraine received under the Biden administration is still an open question. From Kyiv's perspective, France may now appear to be a more reliable intelligence partner than Washington has been over the past year. That shift alone is troubling for Putin. It is far from certain that he believes he can pressure or manipulate Emmanuel Macron in the same way he attempts to influence Donald Trump. France's intelligence support is not limitless, and Ukraine has every reason to keep the United States closely engaged if possible. Still, with roughly 2/3 of its intelligence now coming from France, Ukraine is no longer at risk of being left in the dark if American support is paused again. It is impossible to confirm specific operational details, but Ukraine may already have used French-provided intelligence during a 48-hour wave of airstrikes that pierced air defenses across occupied territory, destroying multiple Russian radar installations and surface-to-air missile systems. And if you found this breakdown useful, make sure to follow for more in-depth analysis on how intelligence sharing is shaping the war in Ukraine.